Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Stacker Chat. My name is Gina, and I'm a team member with the Stacks project, joined by Stacks founder Muneeb Ali. Thanks for being here, Muneeb. How are you?
Great, and I love these regular shows that we do now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to everyone for watching them and checking them out, leaving comments. We'd love to hear from you about what topics you're interested in hearing about. Feel free to leave comments or reach out on Twitter. We'll leave info down below. But yeah, there's been a lot of exciting news about Stacks lately, and today I wanted to dive in. One of the things that you posted about recently was NFTs on Bitcoin, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more. What what have you been hearing from folks that are interested in building NFTs on Bitcoin specifically? I think the concept is somewhat new. We're used to other networks having NFTs. Can you just unpack some of the benefits and the reasons why one might want to create an NFT on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic. I think some weeks ago I was tweeting about the history of NFTs, right? Like how NFTs actually go all the way back to Bitcoin, like where using counterparty, people were actually issuing things like rare Pepes, but even further back in time with this thing called Namecoin that was merged mined with Bitcoin back in the day, where people could start these non-fungible tokens, more specifically decentralized names at the time. So NFTs have a very rich history with Bitcoin. You can easily do this on top of Bitcoin, but the thing to keep in mind is that there are two potential downsides for trying to do that directly at the Bitcoin base layer. One, the transactions are going to be expensive, right? So Bitcoin transaction fees are quite high, and then Bitcoin also tends to appreciate in value, and the transaction fees become higher. And secondly, you can't embed like that much data directly in the Bitcoin blockchain, and you can't have like full smart contracts there. Like there are more limited scripting approaches. And that's where Stacks comes in. So Stacks is a L1 blockchain, connects to Bitcoin, brings smart contracts to it. And I think that kind of like solves those issues, that transaction fees could be cheaper on the Stacks side, and Stacks can have full smart contract functionality. So people can basically program whatever they want to program in terms of the NFTs and so on. And these NFTs are still settling on Bitcoin. They're benefiting from the security of Bitcoin. And that is really important for NFTs because it's all about provenance. It's all about ownership, right? Like you want to define these assets on a network that is likely going to be around 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And I think Bitcoin is that thing that has the highest probability of survival, looking at all the crypto networks out there. So I think that makes NFTs super interesting on Bitcoin. I was actually away from like Twitter and Telegram and notifications for a week, trying to do some more deep work and disconnect from the day-to-day interactions. And I came back online recently, and one of the first things I noticed was Ari Paul, he's a friend of the project. We've known him for several years. Great person, and he was tweeting about that he's willing to pay $1 million in cash to somebody who can implement CryptoKitties on top of Bitcoin. He was trying to make a point that that there's a reason that people haven't done that, and this bet I actually didn't know was from 4 years ago and is no longer valid. But I thought like the bet is still valid, so I was having some fun with it. I was like, okay, Ari, you're putting up $1 million. I'm gonna like walk people through step by step how to implement CryptoKitties on Bitcoin. And the interesting thing there is that there is an NFT standard on Stacks already. I believe it's like SIP 009 that defines how to have NFTs in a more standardized way on Stacks. And there are several applications already. I think Boom Wallet is one of them where people can go and create NFTs and so on. But then people might have this criticism of these NFTs that, hey, yeah, they're kind of like on Stacks that settles on Bitcoin, but they're not really on Bitcoin, right? So I was actually walking people through a modification of the SIP 009 standard, where an alternative way to mint an NFT could be that you could actually almost like color, let's say one STX to mint a NFT. And I think you can do that in various ways, but this is the high level concept. And the reason like why I'm trying to almost like link like a Stacks asset with an NFT is Stacks assets can be moved with direct Bitcoin transactions right now. Like that, this functionality is already live, right? So just like I can make a Bitcoin transaction to either transfer or stack a Stacks token. I would be able to, if the same token also now represents an NFT, I can actually move the NFTs around. So at that point, the NFT is owned by a Bitcoin address. You can transfer the ownership of the NFT through a pure Bitcoin transaction on the Bitcoin main chain. And you can even implement auction systems, right? Like there could be a smart contract where people are actually bidding in Bitcoin, and the highest bidder can automatically get selected as the winner of the NFT. There are some more technical details there, but the high level point I was trying to make is that at that point, it's a Bitcoin NFT, like literally owned by a Bitcoin address, moves by a Bitcoin transaction. You can bid using Bitcoin transactions. So these things are possible today. And I think the Stacks blockchain, the master design really launched in January of this year. And slowly developers are discovering that, oh, a lot of things that we thought are not possible with Bitcoin before. And I think Ari Paul's tweet is a great example of that. They're clearly possible now and very easy to do and very easy to program. And I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into a point that you mentioned here, where Stacks recognizes pure just Bitcoin transactions for transfers and ownership. I've done like a multi-sig Bitcoin transaction for some transfers, and so I know it's possible, but I'm just curious for our audience, can you break down the mechanics of really how the Stacks chain like recognizes those Bitcoin transactions?
Yes, so I think the way to think about Stacks is it's an L1 blockchain that connects to Bitcoin. So it's like two L1 blockchains that are connected together. And whenever that happens, you have to decide like which one of them is the leader, which one of them is the ultimate source of truth. And for Stacks, it's Bitcoin, right? Like Bitcoin is the leader, Stacks is kind of like a follower L1. So whatever actions happen on Bitcoin, they are the ultimate source of truth. And the Stacks side kind of like accepts that. And interestingly, so this concept is actually broader because we could have other types of Stacks functionality that can work as pure Bitcoin transactions as well. It's just that right now, there are two operations. One is transfer, and the second is stacking. Those two operations are implemented in a way that pure Bitcoin transactions would trigger. But this concept is general. Like you could actually expand it to pretty much any Stacks functionality that you can think of, and Bitcoin transactions can absolutely trigger that. So interestingly, this is a really good point for a lot of people who are, let's say, more on one end of the spectrum on the Bitcoin space, where they just believe in Bitcoin, the asset, and they would go like, hey, why can't I just use Bitcoin for gas? The interesting thing is, yes, you can. If you want to pay a high gas fee and you want to do a transaction on the Bitcoin side, do it, and Stacks will recognize that. But if you want to pay a cheaper fee, gas fees, and you want to directly do a Stacks transaction, you can do that as well. So I think by bringing that optionality and by almost like giving people the option so that they can compare and contrast that, okay, I can do this as a Bitcoin transaction, but it's actually going to cost me more money. It might actually be slower because microblocks don't work on the Bitcoin side and so on. It might be a little more complicated as when you did your transaction, you would have noticed that it was a little bit more complicated to do it on the Bitcoin side versus the UX is like much nicer, much easier to do on the Stacks side because that's what Stacks is designed to do. Like it's a smart contract L1 blockchain, which is a modern blockchain. It just launched in January of this year. So I think those are some of the pros and cons. But this is generally a subset of the overall design where Stacks contracts and the Stacks chain is fully aware of Bitcoin state and state changes. So if any state changes on the Bitcoin side, Stacks actually knows about it. So when you're doing a Bitcoin transaction, Stacks knows about it. And if you do that transaction in a particular way, it can trigger an action on the Stacks side, which is how the transfer and the stacking operations are currently implemented and they're live.
Absolutely. Very cool. So just to go back to NFTs, I think that there's certain things that like haven't even been fully explored yet because they're so new. So I know that the Boom.money team has been working on stacking NFTs, which essentially unlocks like programmable Bitcoin yields for folks that maybe hold an NFT. But I'd just love to hear a little bit more from your perspective of like what you think the aha moment might be, or what you really see as possible for creators at this time.
Yes, I think that's a very exciting feature, right? This is something that, frankly, I didn't even fully recognize before Stacks launched. Like, I think the Bitcoin yield aspect, I thought it was like fascinating and it's interesting, but it has taken a life of its own, right? Like, people are doing so many new things with the Bitcoin yield stuff. Like, their entire almost like small startups that are launching that are focusing on just the Bitcoin yield aspect. And I think it's a very, very unique thing. There is no other crypto asset out there that has a native Bitcoin yield associated with it. There are lots of proof of stake coins where if you stake that coin, you can earn more of the same coin. But that's like pretty much like every proof of stake blockchain. Stacks is the only asset where, and also you're not staking, like your funds are not at risk of being slashed. It's a very different concept where you're locking up capital and you're directly earning Bitcoin on the main Bitcoin chain. So you lock up asset on the Stack side and you earn Bitcoin on the Bitcoin side. And now people are kind of like remixing that, and they're trying to do interesting things with it. For example, the team at Arcadico, they're looking at, if you provide Stacks collateral for a stablecoin, maybe you can earn a Bitcoin yield on it. Very interesting concept, right? Similarly with Boom, they are looking at what if you can somehow enable your NFTs to earn a Bitcoin yield. And I think like these concepts, like once people can like start remixing them and trying to come up with new variations, can actually lead to fairly interesting things. Like, for example, with the NFT one, in some ways you can say, well, NFT is valuable at least to the extent that the yield that you can get out of it. So if you think Bitcoin has value, because Bitcoin is a store of value, and this NFT is actually giving you a yield in Bitcoin, then it has intrinsic value, right? And then obviously any artistic value that you might have on top of that is separate from that, but there's some base value attached to the NFT because it's actually earning you Bitcoin. And I think that's a very interesting concept, and I wouldn't be surprised if developers and innovators, they kind of like tweak around with this concept even more to see like what else can be done, because these things are programmable and anyone can come in and basically build new things on top of the Legos that are available.
For sure. Now, in terms of Legos, you actually brought up an interesting one recently, where Coindesk reported that USDC is planning to expand to Stacks to essentially create USDC stablecoin on Stacks. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of the highlights that make this a really exciting opportunity for DeFi on Bitcoin?
Yes, I think that was I read about it in Coindesk, and I was very excited about it. I think that the main takeaways for me, number one is I think it's a little bit of a narrative violation, like in the sense that if you look at the mainstream narrative in crypto, the idea is that decentralized finance is not possible in Bitcoin. That's why people are doing it on Ethereum, or they're doing it on other chains and so on and so forth. But clearly a narrative violation. Like if DeFi is not possible, then how is USDC being issued on top of Stacks, which actually settles on Bitcoin and it brings DeFi into Bitcoin, right? So that's the number one thing. Like, I think it would catch people's attention that, wait, like DeFi is actually growing in the Bitcoin ecosystem, because now an established stablecoin like USDC is actually coming to the Bitcoin ecosystem. So I think that's like the first thing. But the next thing would be that I think it actually helps with the idea of Bitcoin as kind of like the center of crypto, where USDC issued on the Stack side naturally, automatically actually settles on Bitcoin, right? So if you're doing these transactions, these USDC transactions, with the USDC that's issued on the Stack side, then the history of these transactions, or the history of the blockchain, is actually recorded in a way that for anyone to change that history, they would also have to change Bitcoin's history, which I think is a very powerful thing. Like imagine like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, someone wants to audit, or if there's some sort of a dispute and you want to go back and basically see what were the transactions that are done. Some of the blockchains on which you might have done those transactions might have disappeared from the face of the planet, right? Like we don't know which one of these blockchains are going to survive or not. And I think the thesis that Bitcoin has the highest probability of survival because it's the most durable, most secure base layer is actually very strong. And this basically builds up on that and says we can issue a stable currency that actually settles on Bitcoin automatically. And then there are all the possibilities that can happen. We were just talking about Bitcoin yields. Now people can actually try to come up with interesting applications that uses USDC with these Bitcoin yields in new creative ways. And I think it's basically up to the imagination of the developers what they're going to do there. But these are the DeFi building blocks that are now coming online in the like various different parties are kind of like working in the ecosystem and doing these things. And that's super exciting. And then I think you can think of like lending applications, for example, where you want to borrow Bitcoin, where Bitcoin remains on the main Bitcoin chain, and your collateral could be in USDC. Now, if the collateral is in USDC and it's an established stable coin that a lot of institutions hold and so on, that's actually super interesting because now, let's say you're a large institution who already holds a bunch of USDC. They make it very seamless to go from like one chain to another chain anyway. So that means additional liquidity can pour into such Bitcoin, like native Bitcoin trustless lending applications. And I think that's very exciting because the more real usage these applications have and any barriers to entry that we can potentially remove could be very helpful. And I think USDC kind of like integrating on the stack side helps a lot with it. So I think in general, for me, it was a little bit of, I've had this thesis for a while. Jude was, I think, once joking about it as like the Muneeb's law. I call it the kind of like the Bitcoin thesis that successful experiments in crypto would eventually get implemented on top of Bitcoin. And if you look at USDC, that has actually gained a lot of market adoption recently. Like I think Circle and Center and other partners in that ecosystem, they've done a tremendous job of focusing on this use case, growing that use case. And that's the stable coin that is actually gaining a lot of adoption, gaining a lot of market share. And now naturally it's coming to Bitcoin. And I think if people like the properties of like the USDC settling on Bitcoin, this natural connection with Bitcoin yield, or even like the fact that it will be programmed in Clarity, which is a much more secure, decidable programming language. If you're talking about keeping hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars in USDC on a smart contract, it really matters what programming language that smart contract is written in, right? So if developers can sleep a little bit easier at night because their contract was written in Clarity, and they could have kind of like a mathematical proof for correctness, or there are certain attack vectors that are simply not possible for the smart contract. I think these things matter. And if USDC starts to take off over here, then I think the network effects actually become even stronger. That something that's implemented on top of Bitcoin, because it has access to higher liquidity, because it has increased security, can have network effects that actually make that use case kind of like even grow faster. So I think that's the overall thesis, and this is kind of like an early sign to see that yes, that's happening. It's a successful experiment in crypto that's now coming to Bitcoin.
Yeah, very excited. Now, a final question. It's been in the news a lot lately. As someone who's building this entire ecosystem directly on Bitcoin, what is your reaction to China banning Bitcoin mining?
I think it's a little bit like I think overall it's a healthy thing. I know it's almost like a meme that a lot of Bitcoiners would basically say that this is good for Bitcoin, but I truly think this is actually good for Bitcoin because there was actually so much criticism. Like a Bitcoin, whenever you talk about Bitcoin decentralization, that it optimizes for decentralization and it's kind of like the most decentralized network. The number one criticism that I think people would throw at you would be like, hey, what about the mining concentration in China? Well, the mining concentration in China is now disappearing, right? And I think it also shows the resilience of the network, that how quickly hash power is getting distributed. People are kind of like shipping out miners from China to other places, and so these things will start coming online elsewhere. But if the total hash rate is going down, the protocol is just going to adjust the difficulty, just like it always has been for the last 10 plus years. And basically what that means is that new miners now have an additional incentive. It became a little bit easier to mine, right? So new miners have an incentive to come online and earn more Bitcoin. So it's just the protocol at work. But as Bitcoin comes through this kind of like it is in many ways stronger, because this is an event that people were scared of, that, hey, what if China basically bans Bitcoin and all the mining is there, what's going to happen? Well, now we know nothing much happened, right? Like the blocks slow down a little bit because the hash rate was supposed to be at a level and it actually dropped, but the difficulty had not adjusted. So as soon as the difficulty is going to adjust, we're going to see blocks speed up again. People are actually able to just sell their miners. I actually saw a bunch of kind of like requests come in that people want to buy miners. Part of me actually wants to like buy a bunch of them and set up mining farms in places like Pakistan where I grew up and whatnot. But there's only limited time in the day and only limited things I can get involved at. But people are selling these things and shipping them out, right? So we saw a transfer of the hash power happen. And I think overall, like Bitcoin came out to be stronger than it was before. So I think it's a very bullish sign for this technology.
Excellent, thank you. Well, that's a wrap for this week. And for everyone who listened and watched, thank you so much. If you enjoyed your time with us, definitely please subscribe to the Stacks YouTube channel. And we're going to be continuing to post these so you'll get notified. And if you'd like to learn more about Stacks, head over to stacks.co. And definitely make sure that you're following Muneeb at Muneeb on Twitter. So we're going to be tuning in next week. If you'd like to hear about specific topics, have any questions, feel free to reach out either below in the comments or on Twitter. All right, thank you so much. And thanks, Muneeb.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.